It was a cold January morning in 1945. The roads outside Albion, Michigan, were slick with frost, quiet, empty, and unremarkable. But somewhere along Highway M99, that silence was shattered. A car sat smoldering on the roadside. Inside, the body of a man, shot, burned, and left to die. That man was Warren G. Hooper, a newly elected Michigan state senator, only 4 days into office. He had promised to expose corruption in the state government. He had powerful enemies, and now, he was dead. No one was ever charged. No one ever confessed. And to this day, the question remains, who silenced Warren Hooper, and why? Warren G. Hooper wasn't born into power, he earned it. Born in 1904, in Albion, Michigan, he grew up with the Midwest work ethic stitched into his bones. He was the kind of man people in small towns respected, direct, disciplined, and stubbornly honest. Before politics, Hooper was a teacher, then a newspaperman. He understood the weight of truth. And the danger of speaking it too loudly. By the early 1940s, he had made his way into Michigan's political scene, first as a member of the state house, and later, as a newly elected state senator. To his colleagues, he was a reformer, a man who wanted to clean up the system. To others, especially those who thrived in backroom deals and quiet exchanges of cash, he was a threat. And when rumors began circulating that Hooper was about to testify in a massive corruption investigation, whispers in Lansing turned to warnings. Hooper didn't back down. He believed truth could withstand power. But in Michigan's smoky political halls, that belief would soon cost him everything. January 11, 1945. A bitter Thursday morning in southern Michigan. Warren Hooper packed up his car in Lansing, preparing for the short drive back to his hometown of Albion. It was a route he knew by heart, a simple stretch along Highway M99, lined with empty fields and winter trees bending under the cold. But this trip was different. Hooper had told close friends he was on his way home to organize notes. Notes tied to the corruption investigation that had been shaking Michigan's political core. He had already given his word that he would testify before a grand jury. He never made it. Later that afternoon, a passing driver noticed smoke rising from a ditch just north of Springport. The car was still burning when authorities arrived. Inside, they found what was left of Senator Hooper. His body was charred beyond recognition, but the bullet wounds were clear. He had been shot, execution style, before the fire ever started. There were no witnesses. No tire tracks that led anywhere. Only a lonely stretch of highway, a burned car, and a man whose silence had been purchased with lead and gasoline. In the cold Michigan dusk, one thing became certain: whoever killed Warren G. Hooper had done it with purpose, and with power. The road north of Springport, Michigan, was quiet that January day, almost unnervingly so. A narrow stretch of Highway M99 cut through open farmland, with snow-dusted fields stretching for miles and only the occasional farmhouse breaking the horizon. It was the kind of place where a scream could go unheard for hours. When authorities arrived at the site, the air was thick with the acrid smell of burned gasoline. The car, once a symbol of Hooper's independence and mobility, was now a twisted shell, charred and blackened. Bullet holes riddled the interior, a stark reminder that the fire had been set after the shots were fired, a deliberate effort to destroy evidence. Investigators combed the area for clues, tire tracks, footprints, anything that could hint at the killer's path. But the earth had swallowed almost everything. Even the closest witnesses had nothing to report: no strange cars, no suspicious figures, no sounds that might have hinted at the violence that had unfolded. Every detail of the scene spoke of precision and planning. Whoever had orchestrated this murder knew the highway, the isolation, and the perfect timing. The questions left behind were haunting: who was bold enough to act here? Why choose this lonely road? And most importantly, who wanted Warren G. Hooper silenced so utterly? Warren Hooper's rise to the Michigan Senate had not gone unnoticed, and not everyone welcomed it. Behind the polished floors of Lansing's legislative halls, whispers of corruption ran deep. Deals were made in smoke-filled rooms, contracts exchanged hands quietly, and power was guarded jealously. Hooper, with his reputation for honesty and his willingness to speak out, had become a threat. Colleagues recalled his frustration with the backroom deals, his insistence that public officials be held accountable. More importantly, rumors swirled that he was ready to testify before a grand jury, to expose what some in the state government had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. Some historians suggest he had already begun compiling evidence, names, and records that could unravel entrenched power networks. Others whispered that certain figures in Lansing had grown nervous, realizing that Hooper's words could bring more than embarrassment, they could bring prosecution. And then, just 4 days after taking office, Warren G. Hooper was gone. Silenced. The timing was no coincidence. In the cold, calculating world of politics, a single voice brave enough to speak the truth could become the most dangerous threat of all. The question that lingered over Lansing and Albion alike was chilling: had Hooper been murdered not just for what he knew, but for what he was about to reveal? From the moment Warren Hooper's body was discovered, speculation ran wild. Who could have orchestrated such a brazen act on a quiet Michigan highway? The first theory, and the one most whispered in Lansing's corridors, pointed to a political hit. Hooper had made enemies in high places. Men who had everything to lose if his evidence reached the grand jury. Some names floated quietly among journalists and insiders, fellow legislators who feared exposure, lobbyists who had bribed their way to influence, and shadowy aides who operated behind the scenes. The timing, just 4 days after Hooper took office, suggested more than coincidence, it suggested calculation. Another theory touched the darker corners of Michigan's underworld. Could the mob have been involved? In the 1940s, organized crime had a foothold in Detroit and surrounding towns. Hooper's investigations threatened profits and influence. Witnesses claimed to have seen strangers asking questions about his movements in Albion, strangers who vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. Then there was the uncomfortable possibility of a law enforcement cover-up. Some officers were rumored to have been on the take, turning blind eyes to corruption in Lansing. Could the very people charged with investigating Hooper's murder have deliberately stalled the case? The lack of evidence and missing reports only fueled that suspicion. No arrests were ever made. No confessions ever came. And yet, every theory, political, criminal, or institutional, pointed to one truth: Warren G. Hooper's death was no accident. It was a message. A warning. And in Michigan, the echoes of that warning would linger for decades. The investigation into Warren Hooper's murder began with urgency, but it soon became clear that justice would not come easily. Investigators arrived at the charred remains of his car, questioned neighbors, and scoured the fields along Highway M99. But the deeper they dug, the more obstacles appeared. Political interference quickly clouded the process. Key witnesses grew silent, some too afraid to speak, others mysteriously disappeared from public view. Documents that might have shed light on Hooper's research into corruption vanished from government offices. Leads were ignored, timelines ignored, and suspects left unexamined. Every path seemed to dead end, and the case was left to languish in bureaucratic limbo. Rumors swirled of threats made behind closed doors, of men in positions of power ensuring that the investigation would falter. Journalists who tried to press for answers met resistance or intimidation. The message was clear. Hooper's death was not to be questioned too closely. And so, the investigation stalled, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. The man who had promised to expose corruption became another ghost in Michigan's political history, his murder unresolved, his story unfinished, and his killers never held accountable. Warren G. Hooper's death sent ripples through Michigan politics, though few dared to speak them aloud. His absence left a vacuum. One quickly filled by those who continued the same secretive dealings he had sought to expose. Reforms he might have championed never came to pass, and the corruption he had threatened to reveal quietly endured. In Albion, and across the state, his name slowly faded from the headlines. History books mention him briefly, if at all. Yet for those who remember, the questions remain as sharp as the winter wind that swept across Highway M99 that fateful day. Who orchestrated his murder? How deep did the corruption run? And most haunting of all, how many others might have been silenced in similar ways, their stories buried beneath layers of politics and fear? Hooper became more than a man, he became a cautionary tale. A reminder that speaking truth to power can carry a deadly cost, and that justice, no matter how deserved, is not always guaranteed. Even now, decades later, the shadows of his murder linger, quiet, cold, and unresolved. Decades have passed, yet the murder of Warren G. Hooper remains shrouded in mystery. Was it a calculated warning, a chilling message to anyone daring to expose the truth? Or was it the final act of a personal vendetta, executed by those who feared the consequences of his revelations? Names have been whispered, theories debated, but no one has ever been held accountable. Lansing's corridors may still remember him, quietly, as the senator who refused to be silenced. And paid the ultimate price. The road north of Springport is empty again, yet the questions remain. Who ordered the hit? Who pulled the trigger? And most hauntingly, how many secrets from that winter morning will remain buried forever, along with the man who tried to bring them to light? In Michigan, the silence speaks louder than words. And for Warren G. Hooper, it is a silence that will never be broken. The murder of Warren G. Hooper remains one of Michigan's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a chilling reminder of how power, secrecy, and fear can shape the course of history. For days into his term, a man who dared to speak truth to power was silenced, and the answers may never come. What do you think really happened on that lonely stretch of Highway M99? Who wanted Hooper gone, and why? Share your theories in the comments below. Your perspective could shed new light on this decades-old mystery. And don't forget to subscribe, because in the next episode of Unsolved Cases of America, we'll dive into another chilling story, a case where the shadows of crime stretch across a small town, and the truth remains just out of reach. The past may be silent, but the questions, they live on.